Good morning and happy Wednesday, folks. William Tramp here, also known as This FNGM, here to talk to you about Encounter Party. Encounter Party Episode 4 aired last night on the Dungeons & Dragons Adventures Network, which can be found on Freevee or Plex. Now, I'm ready to talk about this episode because, as per usual, I have a lot to say about it. But you should know that there are going to be spoilers in this video, and if you are not in the mood to deal with spoilers, then I would highly recommend watching one of my other videos because they rock! But if you're ready for spoilers, then I'm ready to give them. So let's go ahead and get started. Hit it, Tommy! Have we not replaced Tommy yet? When am I going to get a new Tommy? What do you mean Turn off that camera! We'll cut it out in post. Well, episode 4, Dinner with the Covert Captain, begins with the group discussing who is or where is Captain Yasmin Faraday. You see, they haven't actually met the captain, which is a little odd considering they've been on the ship for a little bit of time. So they go out and decide to do something about it. While the owlbears are running all crazy around the deck, making the entire crew unable to pay attention to them, they decide that they're going to sneak into the captain's chambers to confront Captain Yasmin Faraday, or at least maybe find a body or something. They also discover during this time period that Flick, the kinky rogue, is still blind. What's going on there? What's going on there? But they decide to move forward anyway because that's not their most pressing concern. Dridian calls out at the captain's door, "Hey, buddy, you in there?" Or something like that. That's probably not how Dridian talks. Andrew Krug does it way better than I do. Not getting an answer, they then have Flick pop open the lock, blind, which is, hey, kind of neat, right? Kind of doing it by feel. Flick is a good rogue. And they break into the chambers only to find an unlived-in living space. Where's the captain? So the group begins their investigations into the captain's quarters. Tolo, the barbarian, uses detect magic, so now we know that Tolo is a wild magic barbarian. See if there's any magic in the room. Flick beelines it towards the safe, manages to pop it open, still blind, and finds inside the ship's manifest. In the ship's manifest, we find details for all the passengers and their stuff between Luskin and Waterdeep, and then from now Waterdeep to Baldur's Gate. This is a good find. They also discover while looking through the manifest and other notes that this ship makes literally no profit. Like, none. This ship is pretty much operating exactly at cost, which is a little strange, I would say. You know, like, why get into the travel business if you're not going to be raking in the money, right? Now, after the detect magic goes off, Tolo discovers that there is some sort of glyph on the floor within the living quarters. So, in true barbarian style, Tolo goes and touches it. Poof! Tolo is gone. Well, the others join suit soon enough and find themselves standing in a different portion of the ship, on the second level, inside of a room belonging to Ignis Epsilon. You remember Ignis Epsilon, right? She's the kind of weird, eccentric loner that lives in the back of the ship. Turns out she is Captain Yasmin Faraday, or rather, no one is, because Captain Yasmin Faraday is a farce made up by Ignis Epsilon to basically protect her and her work. What is her work, you might ask? Well, she's been working on creating this experimental vessel. This ship, the Cherry Wind, is not just a magical ship that moves through the water a little bit faster than normal. No. This ship makes jumps through the astral sea, small, tiny little jumps, to reduce the amount of sailing time this vessel has in between two locations down to a crazy low amount of time. It turns out that the ride from Luskin to Waterdeep took them only 3 days, which, having never traveled on a ship from Luskin to Waterdeep, I have to assume that is very fast. Ignis also explains that the ship is, in fact, made up of different attunement spots, which the crew attunes to and that makes the ship go. And the ship hasn't been able to move ever since Hari died. Now, there's a little oddity to that because the ship already hadn't moved a few days before Hari's body was discovered. So I'm kind of curious on if there's another reason why the ship hasn't moved, but we can get into that a little later. The group, of course, very understandably has a lot of questions about what's happening here, but a fight breaks out in the hall, and they have to get into action. Well, before action can begin, Dridian, played by Andrew Krug, does the coolest thing. hits that amulet on their chest dedicated to their god, and suddenly they are completely encased in wooden armor. Oh man, that's cool. 100% on board with this. Andrew, you've done it again. Unfortunately, despite that moment being rad as hell, it turns out that Dridian really did do it and kind of took up a little too much time, I guess, putting on that armor. And by the time they open the door, well, the fight's already over. And inside the hallway towards the stairs are 2 dead bodies. Ambrose and the bodyguard that we met back in episode 1. Ambrose, by the way, was the tiefling sellsword that I totally believe is a member of the Zentarum, and also originally believed was going to be the bad guy of this whole thing. Well, kind of hard to be the bad guy of this whole thing when you're lying dead on the floor. A number of other people are already gathering. The Black Dragonborn cleric is already there taking a look at things, and the group rushes over to see what they can gather as to what's going on here again. The cleric Bazaric is casting spells on the dead Ambrose, who has no eyes. I had forgotten about the no eyes thing. Creepy every single time. Well, Dridian's getting a little suspicious of Bazaric at this point and starts to accuse the Dragonborn of being potentially the one who's causing this all. I mean, they have been at the scene every single time that the group is approached when there's a dead body. Well, this leads to the cleric being led away by the crew, while the group still continues to investigate. Well, they look at the body of the bodyguard and note that the bodyguard is missing their eyes too, but in a different fashion this time. Rather than being burned out, they've been slashed by a blade or by claws or something. This is pretty interesting. At this point, the group is now invited to give their theories as to what is going on, and it is at this point that Flix begins to tell the group about the Tabaxi merchant. You'll remember in episode 1 where the Tabaxi merchant convinced Flick to look inside of the box, and we never got to see what was in there, even though Flick did. Well, Flick reveals at this point what's in the box. What's in the box? And of course, as we all guessed, it was nothing. There's nothing in the box. I didn't actually guess that. I was just as surprised as anybody else. There's nothing in the box, which is very suspicious. With this knowledge of the trunk, the group decides to check the manifest to see who owned that large trunk, and they soon discover that it was Sin, the charge of the bodyguard. Okay, things are starting to come together a little bit, right? So the group decides to go and seek out Sen, who is hiding in their room after their bodyguard had just gotten into this literal life or death, mainly death, struggle. Tolo tries to go and talk to the kid. The group manages to pull Tolo back and says, hey, let's let the halfling do this. The halfling, Olivina, and Flick decide to try to pursue a conversation, but Sen is just not having it at this time. Well, at this point, the group decides they need to figure out exactly what's going on, so they decide to head straight to the merchant. So they kick down the merchant's door, and the Tabaxi's in there freaking out, already packing their stuff to get out the door. Well, it turns out the merchant only thought that there may be something valuable inside of that trunk, because the merchant is completely out of money. This trip has caused him to go completely bankrupt, and I'm pretty sure that the fact that they've had these delays probably hasn't been helping at all. Well, he decides that his whole plan is to steal from a little girl. Good move! The group then decides to head downstairs to the cargo hold and see what's in the box for themselves. Of course, when they arrive to it, there is nothing, but they do remember that there is a big old closed door that no one's ever walked through at this point. Of course, the door is magically locked, which makes sense. One of the doors on this ship probably should be magically locked if it's one gigantic magic ship. So they go to ask Jorgen the cook for the key. Jorgen, being the cool guy that he is, eventually hands it over. They open the door, and inside is, of course, another dead body. There are a lot of dead bodies on this ship. Cherry wind, more like cherry when did people start dying so quickly on this ship? That would not fit on the side of a boat. They would run out of space. I am sorry. Never mind on that idea, I will workshop that. Well, the body is an old man that they do not recognize. An old man in expensive clothing. While they don't know who this man is, they do kind of recognize the skin tone and complexion to be very similar to that of Sen. And they kind of gather that this person is probably related to the young woman, and also this body was probably in the trunk at some point or another. Well, as is practical in this situation, the group decides to go confront Sen and ask her, hey, what's with this dead body in the trunk? When they confront Sen the second time, Sen is a little more open to talking. You see, it turns out that Sin is a princess, and that man in the trunk was her father, presumably the king. Her father has been hunted by a creature that has managed to possess people throughout their army back home, and has led to a number of people dying in terrible, gruesome ways. Well, the creature apparently is able to pass from one body to another through connected eyesight, which explains why the bodyguard had slashed their own eyes to keep this from happening, and why Sin wouldn't meet the eyes of anybody in the group when they first came to talk to her, because she couldn't be sure that they weren't possessed as well. So they had kept the body of her father, the king, locked in that trunk because the creature was living inside of him. And they wanted to make sure that everybody stayed safe until they could get the creature somewhere where they could figure out maybe what this is all about, or at least get it the hell off the material plane. Well, at this point, the killer could be anybody, but we're starting to suspect that it may be First Mate Marcus Tim or the cleric Brejik. So the group rushes up to the top deck to confront them, but instead they find a weird situation. The Tabaxi merchant has gotten on a dinghy and is trying to escape the boat out into the sea, probably to find some other trunk to steal from. Well, at this point, Tim shows a dark side. First Mate Tim starts demanding that the crew fire their cannons upon the escaping Tabaxi. Everything gets real tense for a moment as the crew seems to be kind of unsure as to what to do in this situation. Tim becomes very hard-nosed that this is how it's going to go, and the group doesn't want to see this happen. But as they begin to make a move towards Marcus Tim, they also notice that the cleric Brejik no longer is wearing their holy symbol. And that is when all hell will break loose. Next episode. That's the end of the episode. A lot of revelations, a lot of questions, and we are heading right into a final confrontation with the strange, body-snatching, eye-jumping creature. Oh, I still have so many questions! But before we get to those questions, let's go ahead and talk about what I liked about this episode, what I didn't like so much about this episode, and then we'll talk about the questions that I would love to see be answered in the next episode. Lots to like about this episode. Tons of revelations. We learned a lot really fast. This ship sounds super cool, by the way. The Cherry Wind hopping through the astral plane. I'm getting a real Spelljammery vibe from this. Tolo's scenting the detect magic. Super awesome. I like that we got the revelation of Flick being blind kind of out of the way. I know they could have milked that for a little longer, but I'm really happy that they didn't, because whenever I'm playing Dungeons & Dragons and somebody has a secret that's starting to become obvious, I beg my players to just reveal the darn thing, because there's only so much you can play the game of, oh, I totally didn't know your character had something going on that I, the player, heard 15 times. It's not a game. It's not a fun game to play, so I'm really glad that they got this out of the way. Drydian's armor is badass. Oh man, every time Andrew reveals some small thing about his character, it's just a delightful time. Brian brought in more props, which always makes me happy. I like the lighting changes as things was going on. That's what a big production gets you. My lights don't change at all unless if I take a tiny little hammer and break it in the middle of a session and say, ooh, scary! It is, because there's broken glass everywhere. Sweeping that aside, let's talk about some things I didn't like so much about this episode. I kind of felt that the very name of the episode kind of gave it away. The name of the episode this time is a dinner with a covert captain, and since last episode we already knew that they were going to have dinner with Ignis Epsilon, it kind of gave that away. There's some jump cuts here. This time were really noticeable, and again, they have like 3 to 5 hours of episodes, and so they got to condense it all down. And so again, the editing is going to be noticeable. There's only so much you can do with that, but I just happened to notice a lot of the jump cuts this time. All right, so questions. I was thinking, one question I had, it was, who makes the maps on the table? Those are really beautiful looking maps of that ship, and I was wildly curious as to who made them. But I did ask Ned, who plays Fleck, who made those maps, and he informed me that Brian does. Brian makes his own maps. How do they get so many nat 20s? They get so many nat 20s. It is intense how many nat 20s they get. Okay, actually, fun fact, I have an answer for you on that. So when they go through the editing process of the episode, they have to kind of keep, they have to take, 3 to 5 hours worth of material and bring it all down to 48 minutes. Well, it turns out that much like at our own tables, Nat ones tend to stall the story out, and cosplayers have to spin their wheels for a little while longer. Now, when you're playing 3 to 5 hours, yeah, that's going to happen a lot. And as the dungeon master, I would just sit there and kind of watch them kind of work through it, and eventually they'll make their way back to where they need to be. But 48 minutes does not really allow for that to happen too often. So, as a result, a lot of the Nat ones, because of the nature of natural ones stalling things out, a lot of the Nat ones get taken out. So it feels like these players have the luckiest dice ever. But what we're actually seeing is the portions where things are happening rather than the portions where things aren't happening, which I actually think it makes a ton of sense. The moment Ned explained that to me, some of the magic went away a tiny bit, but that's okay. It made something that seemed really odd make a lot more sense. Why, Bizarre? What's going on, dude? He was my boy. He was my Black Dragon cleric of Ilmater, one of my favorite gods of the Forgotten Realm setting, and you're gonna tell me that this guy is some sort of traitor or demon creature? Aw, man, why, Berserk? Why? I gotta know what's going on here. I have to know what's going on. So was the box supposed to keep the entity trapped? Was it just that can the entity be trapped in a dead body, or was he just comatose and then just happened to die once somebody opened the box? Oh my gosh, this explained why Flick opened the box and only felt nothing. He couldn't see anything because his eyes didn't work. So it turns out that Flick being blind saved his life. That is fascinating. No, the body was already gone by then. Okay, well then now I have to wonder, does being blind protect you from the creature, or is it just having eyes? That's a big question. Why hasn't the ship moved in 4 days if Hari just died yesterday? I was kind of wondering about that. I'm curious if we get an answer as to that. Finally, my biggest question, I think, to end the night is, who is Sin, the princess of? Right, so they mentioned that Sin is a princess and her father was a king, but I don't think I remember hearing them mention the land that they rule over. I'm a big Forgotten Realms nerd, so I want to know where are they from? Are we dealing with some purple dragons here? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. That is the end of my review for episode 4 of Encounter Party. Again, Encounter Party airs every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Freevee and Plex. Well, the Dungeons & Dragons Adventures Network, which is found on Freevee and Plex. I want to thank you so much for coming with me today to listen to my thoughts on this episode and listening to the things I liked about it, things that I didn't like so much, and also the questions that I have. I want to know if you have questions, if you have thoughts on this episode. Go ahead and share them down in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope to see you here next Wednesday when we take a look at episode 5. Until then, see you later. Is that my new sign off now? Are we doing see you later? Is that what we discussed? I don't like it. Can we do a different one? We'll cut it out in post. Later, dudes!